The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds of 412 Abercorn Street, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where Eleanor had sat for 37 years. I stared at her empty coffee cup, still sitting in the dish rack where I'd placed it 3 days ago after washing it for the last time. My weathered hands trembled slightly as I poured my own coffee, the silence in our Savannah home so complete I could hear the old pipes settling in the walls I'd reinforced back in '89. Harold Whitaker, 81 years old, and I still couldn't believe my Eleanor was gone. 43 years of marriage, and she'd left me sitting alone in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The funeral yesterday had been everything she would have wanted. Simple service at First Presbyterian, burial at Bonaventure Cemetery under the Spanish moss she'd always loved. But now the flowers were wilting on the kitchen counter, and the sympathy casseroles were stacking up in a refrigerator I barely knew how to operate without her guidance. Tyler Graham, my son-in-law, had been making what he called helpful suggestions ever since we'd returned from Bonaventure. He'd cornered me by the coffee pot yesterday morning, still wearing his black suit from the funeral, talking about downsizing and senior living communities. Harold, he'd said, using that tone he reserved for people he considered less intelligent than himself. You can't maintain a house this size at your age. Eleanor was the one keeping track of everything, wasn't she? I nodded politely, too numb with grief to argue, though every structural engineer instinct I'd developed over 4 decades told me something wasn't right about his sudden concern for my welfare. Tyler worked in real estate, always had his eye on property values and market opportunities. This house on Abercorn Street, with its Victorian architecture and prime location in Savannah's historic district, was worth considerably more than when Eleanor and I had purchased it in 1986. My daughter Denise had grown distant since Eleanor's passing, claiming she needed space to process. She'd avoided my phone calls, sent Tyler to handle what she called practical discussions, and generally treated me like I'd become invisible the moment we'd lowered Eleanor's casket into Georgia clay. The girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle in Forsyth Park, who'd helped me design her first treehouse using basic engineering principles, now spoke to me through her husband, like I was a child, incapable of managing my own affairs. Luke, my 17-year-old grandson, was the only family member who still looked me in the eye. Yesterday, while Tyler and Denise whispered in the corner about arrangements, Luke had sat beside me on the porch swing. Eleanor had insisted we install. But before Luke could explain, Tyler had appeared with a folder full of brochures for assisted living facilities in Brunswick and Statesboro, places far enough from Savannah to make visiting inconvenient, cheap enough to preserve what Tyler assumed was a limited fixed income. He'd spread the glossy pamphlets across Eleanor's coffee table, like he was presenting architectural plans for my approval. These places offer everything you'd need, Tyler had explained with practiced enthusiasm. Meals prepared, housekeeping handled, medical staff on site. No more worrying about maintenance or property taxes or any of the headaches that come with homeownership at your age. At my age, the phrase stung more than it should have. Yes, I was 81, but I'd been designing load-bearing structures and foundation systems well into my 70s. My mind was sharp enough to calculate stress loads and soil-bearing capacity, sharp enough to spot the inconsistencies in Tyler's sudden interest in my housing situation. What Tyler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Harold Whitaker owned considerably more than one Victorian house on Abercorn Street. Over 4 decades of careful investment, leveraging my engineering expertise to identify undervalued properties with solid structural foundations, I'd accumulated 3 residential properties worth approximately $2.8 million. Municipal bonds purchased during high-interest periods had grown to $640,000. My lifetime membership in Savannah's most influential Rotary Club chapter had connected me with lawyers, judges, and businessmen who respected my professional judgment and personal integrity. But grief had made me docile, overwhelmed by the simple task of existing without Eleanor's steady presence. I'd let Tyler's suggestions wash over me like background noise, too emotionally exhausted to engage in strategic thinking, too heartbroken to recognize the predatory gleam in my son-in-law's eyes when he looked at property deed documents, Eleanor had kept organized in her desk. This morning, Tyler had called with what he termed exciting news. He needed to discuss the room situation and would be arriving within the hour. Something about his tone, too cheerful and too insistent, had triggered the same instincts that had kept me alive on construction sites for 40 years. When something felt structurally unsound, experienced engineers paid attention. Tyler's car pulled into the driveway exactly on time, his BMW gleaming despite Savannah's morning humidity. Through the window, I watched him stride up the walkway with the confident gait of a man who believed he held all the cards. He knocked twice, then used his key without waiting for permission, a liberty Eleanor had granted for emergencies that Tyler had expanded to include ordinary visits. "Harold," he called out as he entered, his voice echoing through rooms that felt too large and too empty. "We need to talk about space allocation. Denise and I have been discussing the situation, and we've reached some decisions." Space allocation. The engineering term felt clinical and cold when applied to the home Eleanor and I had shared for nearly 4 decades. I found Tyler in the living room, standing near the mantelpiece where our wedding photos and family memories created a shrine to better times. "What kind of decisions?" I asked carefully. Tyler's smile carried the predatory satisfaction of a real estate agent closing a profitable deal. "Well, Harold, the thing is, we need your room back. For a gym. Denise has decided to get serious about fitness, and we're going to convert your bedroom into a proper workout space. You understand." The words hit like a physical blow. My room, the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared through 4 decades of marriage, where she died peacefully in her sleep just 5 days ago, was being claimed for exercise equipment. "Where exactly do you expect me to sleep?" I managed to ask. "That's what we need to discuss," Tyler replied, his tone suggesting the matter was already decided. "We think it's time you moved into one of those nice facilities we looked at yesterday. Better for everyone involved." Through the window, I could see Luke sitting in Tyler's car, staring at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between shame and fear, like he knew something terrible was about to happen, and felt powerless to prevent it. What Tyler didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the house he was preparing to claim belonged entirely to Harold Whitaker. Eleanor's name had been added to utility accounts and insurance policies, but the deed, the mortgage, and all legal ownership documents bore only my signature. The man demanding my bedroom for a gym was standing in a house he had no legal right to occupy. But I was too exhausted by grief to fight, too overwhelmed by Eleanor's absence to engage in legal battles. I nodded slowly, the fight draining out of me like water through cracked concrete. "I'll need time to make arrangements," I said quietly. "Of course," Tyler agreed, though his satisfaction was obvious. "Take all the time you need within reason." The brochure Tyler placed on Eleanor's coffee table felt heavier than it should have in my arthritic hands. Sunset Manor Assisted Living proclaimed the cover in cheerful yellow letters, featuring smiling seniors playing checkers in what looked like a hotel lobby. The monthly costs listed on the back page would consume my entire pension, leaving nothing for personal expenses or emergencies. Denise sat beside Tyler on our couch, the same couch where she'd done homework throughout high school, where Eleanor had read her bedtime stories during elementary years. Now my daughter avoided eye contact, studying her manicured fingernails while her husband presented their decision as inevitable reality. "Dad, you have to understand." Denise finally spoke, her voice carrying a rehearsed quality that suggested extensive preparation for this conversation. "This house is too much for you now. Too many stairs, too much upkeep, too many memories that might be unhealthy to dwell on. Too many memories. As if forgetting 43 years of marriage would somehow improve my mental health. As if erasing the evidence of Eleanor's presence would help me heal faster and more efficiently. Your mother loved this house," I said quietly, running my fingers along the arm of her favorite reading chair. "She spent years getting every detail exactly right. Which is why it's time to let someone else enjoy it," Tyler interrupted smoothly. "Someone who can properly maintain a property this size. You'll be much happier in a community designed for people in your situation." My situation. Widowed, 81 years old, and apparently incapable of managing my own affairs according to family members who'd shown minimal interest in my welfare until Eleanor's death created opportunities for them. Luke appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder like he was heading to school, though it was Saturday afternoon. His eyes met mine briefly, and I saw something that looked like an apology mixed with shame. Whatever was happening here, my grandson understood it better than I did. "Luke, honey, tell your grandfather about the research you did," Denise prompted with artificial enthusiasm. "Show him how nice these places can be." My grandson's face flushed red as he shook his head. "I'm not doing this," he said firmly. "This is wrong, and you both know it." "Luke Graham, you watch your tone." Tyler's voice carried the sharp edge he used when his authority was questioned. "We're making decisions based on what's best for everyone involved, including your grandfather." "Best for everyone?" Luke's voice cracked with emotion. "Or best for your bank account?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. Tyler's face went white, then red, then settled into the cold fury I'd seen him display with subordinates at his real estate office. "Go to your room," he ordered Luke. "This is an adult conversation." "Dad," Denise's voice softened into what she probably thought was compassionate persuasion. "Luke doesn't understand the financial realities. The property taxes alone on this house are more than most people pay in rent. The maintenance costs for a building this old must be enormous. You can't handle those expenses on a fixed income." Fixed income. Another assumption that revealed how little my own family knew about my financial situation. Yes, I received pension payments from the engineering firm where I'd been a partner for 15 years. But those payments supplemented investment income and rental profits that had been accumulating for decades. "What about the family history here?" I asked, making one last attempt to appeal to sentiment. "This is where you grew up, where your mother and I built our life together." Denise's expression hardened into something I barely recognized. "Dad, this isn't your house anymore. It hasn't been for years. Mom was the one who kept everything running, who made all the decisions, who handled the finances. Without her, you're just an old man rattling around in a place too big for you to manage." The words cut deeper than any blade. Not just the casual cruelty of reducing 43 years of marriage to my wife handling finances, but the fundamental lie underlying her assumption. Eleanor had managed our household expenses, our social calendar, our daily routines, but Harold Whitaker had managed our investments, our property acquisitions, our long-term financial planning. Tyler stood up, his movement carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Harold, we've arranged for a moving service to help you pack tomorrow. Sunset Manor has an immediate opening, and we've already placed a deposit to hold the room." Already placed a deposit. With whose money? With whose authorization? The engineering part of my brain began calculating the legal implications of their assumptions about my property rights. "What if I don't want to go?" I asked, though the question sounded weak, even to my own ears. Tyler's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Harold, you don't really have a choice here. The house needs to be prepared for sale. Denise and I can't afford to maintain two properties, and this place is worth more than we could make from renting it out." Prepared for sale. They weren't just evicting me from my bedroom for a gym. They were planning to sell the house I'd purchased, renovated, and maintained for 37 years. The house that belonged to Harold Whitaker. According to legal documents, they'd apparently never bothered to examine. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course you do," Denise agreed, though her tone suggested my thinking wouldn't change their plans. "But Dad, the movers are scheduled for tomorrow morning. We thought it would be easier to handle everything quickly, like removing a bandage." Removing a bandage. As if uprooting me from 43 years of memories was equivalent to treating a minor injury. That evening, after Tyler and Denise had left to make what they called arrangements, I climbed the stairs to the attic space I'd converted into storage years ago. Behind boxes of Christmas decorations and Eleanor's craft supplies, hidden inside a wall cavity I'd created during the 1994 renovation, sat a fireproof safe containing every property deed, investment record, and legal document related to my actual financial situation. The safe opened with a click that sounded like opportunity knocking. Inside, Harold Whitaker's true worth revealed itself in careful documentation spanning 4 decades. Property deeds showing sole ownership of 412 Abercorn Street, purchase agreements for 2 rental properties in Savannah's Victorian district, municipal bond certificates worth $640,000, stock portfolios that had grown steadily since my partnership at Whitaker and Associates Engineering. Luke's soft knock interrupted my document review. "Granddad, can I come up?" "Holy crap," he breathed, then immediately apologized for the language. "Granddad, do Mom and Dad know about any of this? What do you think?" I asked. Luke sat down on an old trunk, his face cycling through several emotions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with anticipation. "They have no idea, do they? They think you're just some broke old man they can push around." I nodded, studying my grandson's face in the dim attic light. "Luke, what exactly did you overhear them planning?" His expression grew troubled. "Dad's been talking to real estate agents about listing the house. He already has someone lined up to do an appraisal next week. He told Mom this place could sell for over $1 million, and they've been arguing about how to split the money." Split the money from selling Harold Whitaker's house. The audacity was breathtaking, but so was their ignorance about property law and ownership rights. "Granddad," Luke continued, "I heard Dad on the phone with someone about power of attorney paperwork. Something about getting you declared incompetent so they could manage your finances." Incompetent. Tyler Graham, who'd never designed anything more complex than a sales brochure, was planning to have Harold Whitaker declared mentally incompetent to manage his own affairs. My phone rang, interrupting what was becoming a very interesting conversation with my grandson. The caller ID showed Walter Price, my legal friend and fellow Rotary Club member for over 20 years. Harold, Walter's voice carried concern and curiosity. "I just got the strangest call from Tyler Graham. Something about helping you with estate planning and guardianship papers. I told him I'd need to speak with you directly, but I wanted to check whether you'd actually requested legal assistance." I looked at Luke, who was listening intently to my side of the conversation. "Walter, I think we need to have lunch tomorrow. There are some things you should know about my situation, and I suspect I'm going to need legal advice sooner than I expected." "Of course. Noon at the Pink House? Perfect. And Walter, this conversation stays between us for now." After hanging up, I turned to Luke, who was watching me with something that looked like hope. "Granddad, are you going to fight them?" I thought about Eleanor, about the life we'd built together, about the family that was trying to steal everything we'd worked for based on assumptions about my helplessness. "Luke, your grandmother always said the best way to handle bullies was to let them reveal their true character, then respond accordingly." My grandson's smile was the first genuine happiness I'd seen since Eleanor's funeral. The moving truck arrived at 7:30 Monday morning, right on schedule, just as Tyler had promised. I watched from the front window as 2 men in blue uniforms began unloading boxes and furniture pads, preparing to execute what they believed was a routine senior relocation. Tyler stood on my front porch with clipboard in hand, directing the operation like a general commanding troops. What Tyler didn't know was that Harold Whitaker had spent the weekend implementing his own strategic plans. Yesterday afternoon, I'd rented a climate-controlled storage unit at Safekeep Storage on Victory Drive, large enough to accommodate whatever belongings I chose to relocate. Not because I was surrendering to their demands, but because strategic retreat sometimes preceded tactical victory. "Morning, Harold," Tyler called out cheerfully as I emerged from the house. "Beautiful day for a fresh start, don't you think?" I nodded politely, carrying a suitcase that contained 3 days' worth of clothing and Eleanor's Bible, the only items I'd need for immediate purposes. The movers could pack everything else according to Tyler's instructions. After all, it would take them several hours to complete the job, giving me time to handle more important business elsewhere. "The folks at Sunset Manor are expecting you around noon," Tyler continued, consulting his clipboard like a prison warden reviewing transfer orders. "Denise wanted to drive you over personally, but she had a hair appointment she couldn't reschedule." A hair appointment. More important than helping her father transition into what she believed would be his final home. The casual cruelty revealed everything I needed to know about my daughter's priorities, "I'll take a taxi," I said quietly. "No need to inconvenience anyone." Tyler's smile suggested he appreciated my cooperation. "That's very considerate, Harold. You're handling this transition better than most people would." Transition. As if being forced from my own home was equivalent to changing jobs or moving to a different neighborhood by choice. The taxi arrived within minutes of my call, a clean sedan driven by a pleasant middle-aged woman named Rosa, who helped me load my suitcase without asking uncomfortable questions about my circumstances. As we pulled away from 412 Abercorn Street, I watched Tyler directing the movers with obvious satisfaction. He was already mentally redecorating what he assumed was his newest real estate acquisition. "Where to, Mr. Whitaker?" Rosa asked. "Safe keep storage on Victory Drive first, then the Pink House restaurant on Reynolds Square." The storage facility looked exactly like what it was. A modern, secure building designed to hold people's belongings during life transitions. I'd selected Unit 247, a climate-controlled space large enough for furniture and boxes, but more importantly, equipped with electrical outlets and sufficient space to set up a temporary living arrangement if necessary. The facility manager, a young man named Kevin with impressive customer service skills, helped me complete the rental paperwork and provided a comprehensive tour of the amenities. "Mr. Whitaker, some of our older customers find this arrangement more comfortable than you might expect," Kevin mentioned as he showed me the restroom facilities and vending machines. "We've had folks stay here temporarily during family disputes or home renovations. It's not exactly the Ritz, but it's secure and quiet." I thanked Kevin and arranged for my belongings to be delivered directly to Unit 247, rather than Sunset Manor. Tyler's moving crew would transport everything according to the address I provided, never realizing they were enabling my strategic independence rather than my surrender. The Pink House restaurant occupied an elegant Savannah mansion, dating to the 1750s, its rose-colored walls and historic architecture, providing an appropriate setting for conversations about family, money, and betrayal. Walter Price was already seated at our usual table when I arrived, reviewing legal documents while sipping sweet tea. "Harold," Walter stood to shake my hand, his expression combining professional concern with personal friendship. "You look like hell, if you don't mind my saying so." "I feel like it," I admitted, settling into the chair across from him. "Walter, I need legal advice about a family situation that's gotten complicated very quickly." Walter had known me for over 20 years through our Rotary Club involvement. He'd handled Eleanor's will, witnessed my property purchases, and understood my financial situation better than anyone except my accountant. His expression grew increasingly serious as I explained Tyler's assumptions about my helplessness and his plans to have me declared incompetent. "Harold, this is elder abuse," Walter said bluntly, after I'd finished explaining the weekend's events. "Financial exploitation with intent to commit fraud. Tyler's talking about having you declared incompetent, while simultaneously planning to profit from selling your property. That's criminal behavior. What are my legal options?" Walter pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes. "First, we need to establish clear documentation of your mental competency. I'll arrange for an independent psychological evaluation this week. Second, we need to review all property deeds and financial accounts to ensure no unauthorized changes have been made. Third, we should consider filing for a restraining order if Tyler tries to prevent you from accessing your own home." I reached into my jacket and pulled out copies of the documents I'd retrieved from the attic safe. Walter's eyebrows rose as he examined property deeds, investment statements, and bank records that revealed Harold Whitaker's actual net worth. "Jesus, Harold," he breathed. "Do they have any idea about your real financial situation?" "None whatsoever. They think I'm surviving on pension payments and Social Security." Walter leaned back in his chair, his legal mind clearly calculating implications and opportunities. "This changes everything. Harold, you're not a helpless victim here. You're a property owner with substantial assets being targeted for theft by family members who've made dangerous assumptions about your capabilities." Our waitress appeared to take lunch orders, providing a brief interruption that allowed Walter time to absorb the scope of what we were discussing. After she'd departed with requests for shrimp and grits, Walter leaned forward with the intense focus he reserved for complex legal problems. Harold, I discovered something interesting when Tyler called me about guardianship paperwork. He's been researching your assets through public records, but he's missed some crucial details. The property transfers he's planning to execute can't be completed without your personal signature, notarized and witnessed. No power of attorney arrangement can override property ownership rights without clear evidence of mental incapacitation. What about Denise's claim that the house isn't mine anymore? Walter smiled grimly. She's confused property usage with property ownership. Yes, Eleanor managed household expenses and daily routines, but Harold Whitaker's name appears on every deed, every mortgage document, and every legal record related to your real estate holdings. Denise has no more claim to 412 Abercorn Street than she does to the governor's mansion. The information felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For 3 days I'd been accepting Tyler and Denise's version of reality, allowing grief to cloud my judgment about legal facts that should have been obvious to someone with my business experience. There's something else you should know, Walter continued, consulting his notes. I did some preliminary research on Tyler's real estate business. He's leveraged well beyond reasonable limits, carrying substantial debt on properties that have declined in value. His sudden interest in your housing situation might be motivated by more than family concern. Financial desperation? Exactly. Harold, desperate people make dangerous decisions. If Tyler's counting on profits from selling your house to resolve his own financial problems, he might be willing to take considerable risks to complete what he started. Our food arrived, providing another brief pause in what was becoming a very enlightening conversation. The shrimp and grits tasted like possibility, like hope seasoned with strategic planning. What do you recommend as our next step? I asked. Walter's smile carried the satisfaction of an attorney who'd identified clear legal advantages for his client. We're going to let Tyler continue implementing his plan while we quietly document every illegal action he takes. Financial exploitation, property theft, elder abuse, every mistake he makes strengthens our position and increases his legal jeopardy. You want me to appear cooperative while gathering evidence? I thought about Eleanor, about the life we'd built together, about the family that was trying to steal everything based on assumptions about my weakness. Walter, how long do we let this continue before taking action? Until Tyler commits enough crimes to guarantee serious jail time, Walter replied. Harold, you've got more power in this situation than they could possibly realize. The question isn't whether you can stop them. The question is how much justice you want to extract before you do. After lunch, Walter drove me to Safekeep Storage to inspect my temporary living arrangements. Unit 247 had been transformed into a surprisingly comfortable space. The movers had delivered everything according to my instructions, and Kevin had helped arrange furniture in a way that provided basic amenities within the larger storage area. This is actually not bad, Walter observed, examining the setup with professional curiosity. Private, secure, and completely outside Tyler's knowledge or control. You could stay here indefinitely, if necessary. I sat down in Eleanor's reading chair, surrounded by boxes containing 43 years of memories, and felt something I hadn't experienced since her death. Control, agency, the power to choose my own response to family betrayal, rather than simply accepting whatever Tyler and Denise decided was appropriate. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. Harold Sunset Manor called asking about your arrival time. Everything okay? I looked at Walter, who was reading the message over my shoulder. What should I tell him? Tell him you're settling in fine and need a few days to adjust. Let him think his plan is working perfectly. I typed back, settling in. Need time to adjust. We'll call soon. Tyler's response came immediately. Great. Take all the time you need. We're handling everything else. Walter laughed grimly. Harold, that man just confessed to managing your affairs without authorization. He's digging his own grave with every text message. Through the storage unit's small window, I could see Victory Drive traffic moving steadily past, people going about their daily business without any idea that Harold Whitaker was about to teach some very important lessons about respect, family loyalty, Tuesday morning arrived with Savannah humidity that could choke a horse, but I woke up in my storage unit feeling more alert than I had since Eleanor's funeral. Strange how sleeping on a narrow cot surrounded by 40 years of belongings could feel more like home than the prospect of Sunset Manor's assisted living arrangements. I'd spent the night reviewing financial documents and making lists of people who owed Harold Whitaker favors accumulated over 4 decades in business. My first call went to Reverend Marcus Washington at First Presbyterian, where Eleanor and I had attended services since 1986. Marcus had been a young associate pastor when we'd joined the congregation, and I'd helped design the structural improvements for their new fellowship hall in 1998. Pro bono work, because I believe churches deserve the same engineering standards as office buildings. Harold, Marcus's voice carried genuine warmth and concern. "How are you holding up, brother?" Eleanor's service was beautiful, but I know these first weeks are the hardest. "I'm managing, Marcus, but I need to ask you about something that might sound strange." I explained Tyler's claims about my mental competency and his plans to sell my house, carefully omitting details about my actual financial situation. Marcus listened with the patience that made him an excellent counselor, occasionally making sounds that indicated both understanding and growing anger. When I finished, his response was immediate and decisive. "Harold, you've been a pillar of this congregation for over 30 years. I've watched you handle complex engineering projects, manage church finances, and make sound decisions even under pressure. Anyone who knows you understands that your mind is as sharp as it ever was. If you need character witnesses for legal proceedings, you'll have more volunteers than you know what to do with." One ally secured. My next call went to James Mitchell, president of Savannah's Rotary Club chapter, where I'd maintained membership since 1983. James ran the largest architectural firm in southeastern Georgia, and we'd collaborated on dozens of projects over the years. He'd also been Eleanor's bridge partner, and understood our family dynamics better than most people. "Harold, I heard about the assisted living situation through the grapevine," James said without preamble. "Sounded fishy to me from the start. Eleanor always said you were the business brain in the family, and Tyler's never struck me as the sharpest tool in the shed." James's blunt assessment of Tyler's intelligence made me smile for the first time in days. "James, I might need some professional references if this situation escalates into legal proceedings." "You'll have them, Harold. Every contractor in Savannah knows your reputation for integrity and competence. If Tyler Graham thinks he can paint you as some doddering old fool, he's in for a very unpleasant surprise." 2 allies secured. I spent the next hour calling former clients, subcontractors, and business associates, carefully explaining my situation without revealing my strategic planning. Each conversation reinforced what I already knew. Harold Whitaker's professional reputation was solid gold in Savannah's business community, and people who'd worked with me weren't easily convinced that I'd suddenly become incapable of managing my own affairs. My phone rang around 10:30, displaying Luke's number. My grandson's voice sounded strained and worried when I answered. "I'm fine, Luke. Tell your father I'm handling some business matters, and will contact him when I'm ready." "Business matters?" Luke's tone shifted from worry to curiosity. "Granddad, what kind of business matters?" I hesitated, then decided my grandson deserved honest answers. "Luke, your parents have made some assumptions about my financial situation that aren't accurate. I'm taking time to consult with lawyers and accountants before making any permanent decisions about where I live." Silence stretched across the phone connection while Luke processed this information. When he spoke again, his voice carried hope, mixed with something that sounded like pride. "You mean you're not broke? You're not helpless?" "Not even close, son." "Holy shit," Luke breathed, then immediately apologized for the language. "Sorry, Granddad, but this changes everything, doesn't it?" "It might." "Luke, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to answer honestly. What exactly have your parents been saying about me since your grandmother died?" Luke's voice dropped to a whisper, suggesting he was having this conversation somewhere his parents couldn't overhear. "Dad's been telling everyone you're losing your memory, that you can't handle basic tasks without help. He showed Mom some papers about power of attorney and guardianship, said it was necessary to protect you from making bad decisions." "Protect me from making bad decisions?" Tyler Graham, who'd leveraged himself into potential bankruptcy through poor real estate investments, was positioning himself as my financial guardian. What did your mother say about these plans? She seemed worried at first, but Dad convinced her it was necessary. He keeps talking about property taxes and maintenance costs, saying you'll lose everything if someone doesn't take control of your finances. I closed my eyes, picturing Tyler's manipulation of my grieving daughter. Denise had always been susceptible to authoritative males, who claimed to have superior knowledge about complex situations. Her ex-husband before Tyler, her college professors, her current husband, all men who'd convinced her that their judgment was more reliable than her own instincts. Luke, I'm going to ask you to do something that might be difficult. I need you to pay attention to your parents' conversations about me, especially any discussions about legal documents or property matters. Can you do that without arousing suspicion? You mean spy on them? I mean, protect yourself by staying informed about decisions that might affect your future as well as mine. Luke was quiet for several seconds, then spoke with mature determination that reminded me of Eleanor. Granddad, I heard them arguing last night about money. Dad owes someone a lot of cash, and he's been counting on selling your house to pay his debts. How much money does he owe? I couldn't hear all the details, but it sounded like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. Mom was crying, asking what would happen if they couldn't pay. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tyler Graham had gambled his family's security on real estate speculation, and now he was planning to use elder abuse and fraud to shift his losses onto Harold Whitaker's shoulders. Luke, this is very important. Do not let your parents know we've had this conversation. Act normally. Continue your regular routines and call me if you hear anything else about their plans. I will, Granddad. And Granddad, I'm proud of you for fighting back. After hanging up, I sat in Eleanor's reading chair surrounded by boxes of memories and began compiling a comprehensive list of Tyler's vulnerabilities. Financial desperation, professional overleverage, assumptions about my helplessness, criminal behavior motivated by panic rather than careful planning. My next call went to Bobby Chen, who'd worked as my apprentice engineer in the early 1990s before starting his own construction company. Bobby now employed 30 people and handled commercial projects throughout southeastern Georgia. He also served on the Savannah Historic Preservation Board, giving him influence over property development decisions in the city's most valuable districts. Mr. Whitaker, Bobby's voice carried the respect he'd maintained since his apprentice days. I was sorry to hear about Mrs. Eleanor. She was a wonderful lady who always treated me like family. Thank you, Bobby. She thought very highly of you, too. I explained my situation carefully, emphasizing Tyler's attempts to have me declared incompetent, while minimizing details about my strategic response. Mr. Whitaker, that's bullshit, Bobby said bluntly. You taught me everything I know about structural engineering, and your mind is sharper than men half your age. If Tyler Graham thinks he can convince anyone in this town that you're senile, he's stupider than I thought. Bobby's assessment of Tyler's intelligence seemed to be universally shared among people who'd met my son-in-law professionally. Bobby, if this situation goes to court, would you be willing to testify about my professional competence? Absolutely. And Mr. Whitaker, I know at least a dozen contractors who'd line up to speak for you. You've got a reputation in this town that Tyler Graham could never understand, let alone damage. 3 allies secured, with promises of additional support from their professional networks. I was beginning to understand that Harold Whitaker possessed something Tyler had never developed: genuine respect from people who'd worked with him over decades. My phone buzzed with another text from Tyler. Harold, we need to know you're okay. Denise is very worried. Please call. I studied the message, noting the manipulation embedded in appeals to Denise's concern. Tyler was using my daughter's emotions to pressure me into contact, probably hoping to determine my location and mental state. I responded, I'm fine. Handling some personal business. We'll be in touch soon. Tyler's reply came immediately. What kind of personal business? Do you need help with anything? Help. From the man who'd been planning to steal my house and have me declared incompetent. The irony was almost entertaining. Just old man stuff. Nothing urgent. My afternoon was spent reviewing investment portfolios and property documents, calculating exactly how much financial power I could bring to bear against Tyler's schemes. The municipal bonds alone were worth more than his entire real estate business. The rental properties generated monthly income that exceeded his average commissions. Harold Whitaker wasn't just fighting back against family betrayal. He was preparing to deploy resources that would make Tyler's financial desperation look like pocket change. As evening approached, I realized something had changed fundamentally since Eleanor's funeral. The grief remained. The sense of loss was still overwhelming. But underneath those emotions, something harder and more determined was taking shape. Tyler had made a crucial error by underestimating Harold Whitaker's capabilities. Now it was time to begin teaching him about the consequences of that mistake. Wednesday morning brought clarity along with Savannah's familiar humidity. I woke up in my storage unit feeling more purposeful than I had since Eleanor's death. Though the irony wasn't lost on me, sleeping among boxes of possessions while my family assumed they'd successfully relocated me to assisted living. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Tyler and 2 voicemails that I decided to ignore until after completing more important business. Walter Price had scheduled our meeting for 9 o'clock at his law office on Bull Street, where we'd finalize the legal strategies we'd discussed over lunch at the Pink House. But first, I had personal business to handle that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in my family situation. I'd spent the previous evening reviewing my existing will, a document Eleanor and I had updated 2 years ago that left everything divided equally between Denise and Luke. Standard family arrangement that assumed loving relationships and mutual respect would continue beyond our deaths. Recent events had revealed how naive those assumptions had been. The taxi ride to Walter's office took me through Savannah's historic district, past houses and buildings where I'd consulted on structural improvements over 4 decades of professional practice. Every few blocks held memories of projects completed, problems solved, clients satisfied with work performed to Harold Whitaker's exacting standards. This was the reputation Tyler thought he could dismiss with claims about my mental incompetency. Walter's office occupied the ground floor of a restored Victorian mansion, its elegant interior reflecting both professional success and genuine appreciation for Savannah's architectural heritage. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had known me for 15 years and greeted me with the warmth reserved for valued clients. "Harold, how are you holding up?" she asked, with sincere concern. "This business with Tyler Graham sounds absolutely awful." Word traveled fast in Savannah's legal community, apparently. "I'm managing, thank you. Is Walter ready for our appointment?" "He's been looking forward to it all morning. Go right in." Walter's private office was lined with law books and framed photographs documenting 30 years of legal practice in Savannah. He looked up from a stack of documents as I entered, his expression combining professional focus with personal friendship. "Harold, I've been reviewing the materials you provided yesterday, and I have some interesting news. Tyler's been busy since our lunch meeting. He's filed preliminary papers with the probate court requesting an incompetency hearing and emergency guardianship powers." The information hit like a physical blow, though I'd been expecting something similar based on Luke's intelligence reports. How can he file for guardianship when I'm obviously competent to manage my own affairs? He's claiming you've disappeared from Sunset Manor and are exhibiting signs of dementia by refusing appropriate care. According to his petition, you're a danger to yourself and potentially to others through poor decision-making related to your finances and living situation. I sat down heavily in the leather chair facing Walter's desk, suddenly understanding the scope of Tyler's desperation. He wasn't just opportunistically exploiting my grief. He was implementing a comprehensive legal strategy designed to strip me of all rights to control my own property and finances. What are my options? Walter pulled out copies of documents that Tyler had apparently filed with the court. Reading my son-in-law's sworn statements about my alleged incompetency felt like being sucker-punched by someone I'd trusted with family dinners and Christmas celebrations. What about the emergency guardianship request? Denied yesterday afternoon. Judge Morrison reviewed Tyler's petition and found insufficient evidence of immediate danger. She's scheduled a preliminary hearing for next Tuesday, which gives us time to prepare our response. Judge Morrison. I'd known Patricia Morrison since she was a young attorney handling property disputes in the 1990s. I'd served as an expert witness in several cases where her clients needed structural engineering testimony. She was thorough, fair, and unlikely to be impressed by Tyler's panic-driven legal strategy. Walter, I want to make some changes to my will before the situation escalates further. Walter nodded, pulling out a fresh legal pad. What kind of changes are you considering? I want Luke to become my sole heir. Denise has chosen to support her husband's attempts to steal my property, so she's forfeited any claim to benefit from my estate. Walter made notes carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific assets and properties. The process took nearly an hour, but when we finished, Harold Whitaker's revised will reflected both his disappointment in his daughter and his confidence in his grandson's character. Harold, there's something else we should discuss. Tyler's financial situation is worse than we initially realized. I've done some additional research, and he's facing foreclosure on 2 commercial properties by the end of next month. He needs immediate cash injection of at least $400,000 to avoid bankruptcy. The information explained Tyler's desperation and aggressive timeline for seizing control of my assets. He wasn't just greedy, he was financially drowning and trying to use my property as a life preserver. How does this affect our legal strategy? It gives us leverage. Tyler's incompetency petition isn't motivated by concern for your welfare. It's motivated by his own financial crisis. We can demonstrate clear evidence of ulterior motives that undermine his credibility as a potential guardian. Walter reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder containing additional legal documents. Harold, I'm going to file counter-motions today that will put Tyler on the defensive. First, a motion to dismiss his incompetency petition based on lack of evidence. Elder abuse. The legal terminology felt surreal when applied to my own family situation, but Tyler's behavior clearly met the criteria for financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. What happens next? Tyler receives copies of all our filings by Friday afternoon. He'll realize that Harold Whitaker isn't the helpless victim he thought he was targeting. His attorney will probably advise him to withdraw the incompetency petition and negotiate some kind of settlement. I thought about Eleanor, about the 43 years we'd spent building something meaningful together, about the family that was trying to steal everything based on assumptions about my weakness. Walter, I don't want a settlement, I want justice. I want Tyler to face consequences for what he's attempted, and I want everyone in Savannah to understand what kind of man he really is. Walter leaned back in his chair, studying my face with professional assessment. Harold, that's going to require playing this situation out to its conclusion. Court proceedings, public testimony, media attention. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny and stress? I'm 81 years old, Walter. I've survived 4 decades in construction, raised a family, built a business, and buried the woman I loved more than life itself. If Tyler Graham thinks he can intimidate Harold Whitaker with legal proceedings, he's about to learn how wrong he can be. Walter's grin was pure legal predator. In that case, Harold, let's give him an education he'll never forget. After leaving Walter's office, I took a taxi back to Safekeep Storage to review the documents we'd prepared and plan my next moves. Tyler's incompetency petition had revealed the scope of his desperation, but it had also provided me with ammunition to destroy his credibility and potentially his career. My phone rang as I settled into Eleanor's reading chair, surrounded by boxes of memories. Luke's number appeared on the display. Granddad, Dad's going crazy looking for you. He called the police this morning claiming you're missing and potentially dangerous. What did the police tell him? They said, unless he has evidence of actual danger, adults are allowed to go wherever they want without reporting their location to family members. Dad was furious, but there wasn't anything he could do. I smiled, picturing Tyler's frustration when his manipulation tactics failed against people who understood legal requirements for adult welfare checks. Luke, your father filed papers with the court yesterday claiming I'm mentally incompetent and requesting guardianship powers over my finances. Silence stretched across the phone connection while Luke processed this information. When he spoke again, his voice carried a mixture of anger and disbelief. He's trying to have you declared insane so he can steal your money? Essentially, yes. That's sick, Granddad. That's really sick, even for him. Luke's assessment of his father's character was both heartbreaking and encouraging. My grandson understood the moral implications of Tyler's behavior, even if Denise had been convinced to support her husband's schemes. Luke, I need you to understand something important. Your father is facing financial problems that are much worse than your family realizes. He's desperate enough to commit crimes to solve them, which makes him potentially dangerous. Dangerous how? People who are cornered sometimes make very bad decisions. Be careful around him, and call me immediately if he does anything that makes you uncomfortable. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began composing a letter to every member of Savannah's Rotary Club chapter. It was time to let my community know exactly what Tyler Graham had attempted and ensure that Harold Whitaker's version of events reached people who mattered before Tyler could spin his own narrative. The letter was carefully worded to avoid legal complications while making Tyler's behavior absolutely clear to people who'd known me for decades. By tomorrow morning, every influential businessman in Savannah would understand that Tyler Graham had attempted elder abuse and fraud against one of their most respected colleagues. Tyler wanted a fight? Harold Whitaker was about to give him one he'd never forget. The conference room at Price & Associates occupied the second floor of Walter's Victorian mansion. Its tall windows overlooking Reynolds Square where Spanish moss filtered morning sunlight into patterns that shifted like memories. Tuesday morning had arrived with the weight of inevitability. Today's incompetency hearing would determine whether Harold Whitaker retained control of his life or surrendered everything to Tyler Graham's desperate schemes. Tyler arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes early, accompanied by his attorney, David Breslin, a young man whose nervous energy suggested this was his first elder abuse case. They huddled near the building entrance, Tyler gesticulating frantically, while Breslin consulted legal documents with obvious uncertainty. From my position across the square, I watched my son-in-law's agitation with something approaching pity. Desperate men made predictable mistakes. Denise appeared a few minutes later, her face pale and drawn, walking with the hesitant steps of someone attending a funeral rather than a legal proceeding. She'd barely spoken to me since Eleanor's death, accepting Tyler's version of my mental decline without questioning his motives or seeking independent verification. Today, she would learn exactly how naive that trust had been. Luke was the last family member to arrive, his 17-year-old face carrying a mixture of anger and anticipation. He spotted me across the square and nodded slightly, a gesture his parents missed, but I understood perfectly. My grandson had become my intelligence asset over the past week, reporting Tyler's increasingly frantic conversations about money, property, and the legal strategies that were failing to produce expected results. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom occupied the historic courthouse's main floor, its high ceilings and traditional oak furnishings reflecting the dignity of legal proceedings that would determine family relationships for generations. I entered through the public gallery doors, dressed in my best navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, carrying a leather briefcase containing documentation of my actual financial situation. Tyler's reaction to my appearance was everything I'd hoped for. His face went white, then red, then settled into the controlled panic of a man realizing his assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. He whispered urgently to his attorney, who shook his head repeatedly while consulting notes that apparently provided no useful guidance. Walter took his position at our table with the confident bearing of an attorney who'd thoroughly prepared for battle. He'd assembled character witnesses, including Reverend Washington James Mitchell from the Rotary Club, and Bobby Chen representing Savannah's construction community. Their combined testimony would establish Harold Whitaker's reputation for competence and integrity among people who'd worked with him professionally. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Morrison entered the courtroom. Patricia Morrison was 53 years old, Harvard-educated, and known throughout Georgia's legal community for her thorough approach to complex cases. She'd reviewed all preliminary filings and supporting documents before today's hearing, giving her comprehensive understanding of the issues at stake. "This is the matter of Graham versus Whitaker, petition for emergency guardianship based on alleged mental incompetency," Judge Morrison announced, settling behind her bench with the authority of someone who'd presided over thousands of similar proceedings. "Mr. Breslin, please present your client's case." Tyler's attorney stood nervously, consulting notes that seemed inadequate for the task ahead. Your Honor, Tyler Graham seeks emergency guardianship of his father-in-law, Harold Whitaker, based on evidence of mental decline and dangerous decision-making that puts Mr. Whitaker at risk of financial exploitation. Mr. Breslin, what evidence do you present to support claims of mental incompetency? Breslin shuffled through his papers, clearly struggling to find substantial documentation. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker abandoned his assigned assisted living facility, refuses appropriate medical care, and has been making financial decisions without consultation or oversight from family members who understand his limitations. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Mr. Breslin, adults are generally free to choose their living arrangements and make financial decisions without family oversight. Do you have medical evidence of cognitive impairment? Well, Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker's behavior since his wife's death has been erratic and concerning to family members who know him well. That's not medical evidence, Counselor. Do you have psychological evaluations, physician reports, or documented incidents of impaired judgment? Breslin's stammering response revealed the fundamental weakness in Tyler's case. No medical documentation, no psychological assessment, no evidence beyond family claims about behavioral changes following a spouse's death, which any competent judge would recognize as normal grief responses rather than cognitive decline. Judge Morrison turned to Walter with obvious relief. Mr. Price, please present your client's response. Walter gestured toward our witness table, where Reverend Washington, James Mitchell, and Bobby Chen sat ready to testify. More importantly, Your Honor, we have evidence that Tyler Graham's petition is motivated not by concern for Mr. Whitaker's welfare, but by his own financial desperation and desire to access my client's property without authorization. Judge Morrison leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of evidence, Mr. Price? Walter opened his briefcase and withdrew documents I'd helped him prepare over the past week. Your Honor, Tyler Graham is facing foreclosure on multiple properties and needs immediate cash injection to avoid bankruptcy. He's already arranged real estate appraisals on Mr. Whitaker's house and discussed selling it with multiple agents. This petition represents attempted financial exploitation, not legitimate guardianship concerns. Tyler's face went ashen as Walter presented bank records, foreclosure notices, and recorded phone conversations with real estate agents that revealed his true motives. His attorney whispered urgent consultations that Tyler ignored, too shocked by the revelation of how thoroughly his schemes had been documented. Mr. Graham, Judge Morrison addressed Tyler directly. Are you currently facing financial difficulties that might be resolved by accessing Mr. Whitaker's property? Tyler stood slowly, his confident demeanor replaced by the desperate panic of a cornered animal. Your Honor, my financial situation is separate from my legitimate concerns about Harold's welfare. Yes, I've had some business setbacks, but that doesn't change the fact that he needs protection from his own poor judgment. What specific examples of poor judgment can you provide? Tyler struggled to answer, finally claiming that my refusal to enter assisted living demonstrated impaired decision-making. Judge Morrison's expression suggested she found this reasoning unpersuasive. Walter called Dr. Henley as our first witness, and her testimony was devastating to Tyler's case. Harold Whitaker scored in the 95th percentile on all cognitive assessment measures. His memory, judgment, and reasoning abilities are excellent for any age. Remarkable for someone 81 years old. I found no evidence of dementia, depression, or any condition that would impair his capacity to make financial or personal decisions. Reverend Washington followed with testimony about my community involvement, church leadership, and sound judgment in handling congregational finances. James Mitchell described my continued participation in Rotary Club activities and my respected status among Savannah's business community. Bobby Chen testified about my professional competence and my mentoring of young engineers well into my 70s. Each witness painted the same picture. Harold Whitaker as a sharp, competent, respected member of Savannah's community who remained fully capable of managing his own affairs despite recent grief and family pressures. Tyler's case collapsed under the weight of evidence and the absence of legitimate medical documentation. Judge Morrison's final ruling was swift and decisive. Motion for emergency guardianship is denied. Mr. Graham has failed to provide credible evidence of mental incompetency and has demonstrated ulterior financial motives that undermine his credibility as a potential guardian. Furthermore, this court finds preliminary evidence of attempted elder abuse that should be referred to appropriate authorities for investigation. Tyler sat down heavily, his face reflecting the complete destruction of his schemes and the dawning realization of potential criminal consequences. Denise was crying silently, finally understanding that her husband had manipulated her into supporting an attempt to steal her father's property. Luke caught my eye from across the courtroom, his smile reflecting pride mixed with relief. My grandson had witnessed justice served against the man who'd tried to exploit our family's grief for personal gain. After court adjourned, Walter and I stood on the courthouse steps while Tyler, Denise, and Luke walked past without speaking. Tyler's legal strategy had failed completely, but more importantly, his true character had been revealed to everyone who mattered in Savannah's close-knit community. "Harold," Walter said with satisfaction, "Tyler Graham's reputation in this town is finished. No one will trust him with property transactions after this. His real estate career is effectively over." I watched my family disappear around the corner, Tyler walking with the defeated posture of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. Justice had been served, but the cost had been the destruction of relationships I'd cherished for decades. "Walter, what happens next?" "Now we file civil charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. Tyler's going to learn that Harold Whitaker's consequences are just beginning." Thursday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that follows storms, both meteorological and personal. I woke up in my storage unit knowing this would be the day Tyler Graham learned the full scope of consequences awaiting people who attempt to steal from Harold Whitaker. Walter had spent Wednesday afternoon preparing legal documents that would fundamentally alter my family's understanding of power relationships and property ownership. My phone buzzed at 7:30 with a text from Luke. "Dad got some kind of legal papers yesterday. He's been throwing things and yelling at Mom all night." "What did you do?" They smiled as I typed back. "I reminded your father that actions have consequences." "Are you safe?" "Yeah, I stayed at Tommy's house. Mom's scared to be alone with Dad right now. He keeps saying you've ruined everything." Tyler was partially correct. I had ruined his plans to steal my property and have me declared incompetent. But he'd ruined his own life through desperation-driven criminal behavior that revealed his true character to everyone who mattered in Savannah's business community. The legal papers Luke referenced were eviction notices, served Wednesday afternoon by a sheriff's deputy, who'd found Tyler and Denise at 412 Abercorn Street, discussing which rooms to convert first now that they assumed I was permanently relocated. The irony must have been exquisite, receiving orders to vacate a house they'd never legally owned while making plans to redecorate it. Walter had also included foreclosure proceedings against Tyler's leveraged properties, accelerated by missed payments and the public revelation of his financial desperation during Tuesday's court hearing. By Friday afternoon, Tyler Graham would lose everything he'd built through years of over-aggressive real estate speculation. My taxi arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, driven by Rosa, who'd become my regular transportation since this family crisis began. She'd heard enough of my phone conversations to understand the basic situation and offered the kind of supportive commentary that helped clarify my own thinking. "Mr. Whitaker, you're handling this family business like a gentleman," she observed as we drove toward Bull Street. "Some people would have been nastier about it." "Rosa, nastiness isn't necessary when justice is available through proper legal channels. That's what I mean. You're doing this the right way, even though they treated you wrong. The right way." Eleanor had always insisted that moral behavior required taking difficult paths rather than convenient ones, even when personal relationships suffered as a result. She would have approved of using legal remedies rather than emotional retaliation, though she would have been heartbroken by the necessity. Walter's office was bustling with activity when I arrived, Mrs. Patterson coordinating multiple phone calls while junior associates prepared additional legal documents. Word had spread through Savannah's legal community about Tyler's failed guardianship attempt, generating both professional interest and personal satisfaction among attorneys who dealt with his aggressive tactics over the years. "Harold," Walter looked up from a stack of papers with obvious satisfaction. "Tyler's attorney called this morning requesting a meeting to discuss possible settlement options. Apparently, yesterday's eviction notices convinced him that his client's situation is more serious than originally realized. What kind of settlement is he proposing? Complete withdrawal of all guardianship petitions, public apology for the incompetency claims, and agreement to vacate your property immediately in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. I considered the offer while watching traffic move through Reynolds Square. Tyler was trying to negotiate his way out of consequences, offering to return what he'd attempted to steal in exchange for avoiding jail time and professional destruction. Walter, what would you advise? Personally, I think Tyler Graham needs to learn that actions have consequences, and settlement agreements don't provide the education he requires. But professionally, I have to mention that trials are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining for everyone involved. I thought about Eleanor, about the life we'd built together, about the family that had tried to steal everything based on assumptions about my helplessness. Tyler's settlement offer was an admission of guilt disguised as negotiation. Decline the settlement. Tyler made his choices. Now he can live with the results.